This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
Thanks, everybody, for downloading this latest podcast from the Detroit Sports Podcast Network. This is Check the Report. I am the Doc, John Macaroon, your host, looking to bring you guys quality interviews, talking to people that are in the know in the world of Detroit sports, interesting people that I think that you should know about and that are doing great things. We started this project, the Detroit Sports Podcast Network, back in 2013, and we've had a myriad of shows now. I think we've put on around 15 or 16 different shows. I think 12 of them have lasted consecutively for the better part now of 5 years. So I'm really proud of the work that we've done here at the Detroit Sports Podcast Network. And the mark that you know that the work that you're doing is resonating is that week after week, quarter after quarter, the downloads are increasing. We have a great relationship with Sports Illustrated and Maven Sports. And now it's great to see other sports podcast networks popping up. So look for other guests. I think that, something I've always enjoyed doing is interviewing people. I've had a one-on-one series back a couple years ago where prior to COVID, I would have people in the studio and get their story. So I've enjoyed the conversations with the likes of Ken Cal, Dan Miller, and program directors. Those that have worked in sports have sat across from me, and I've learned from each and every one of them. And so once COVID ends, I think I will, bring that back. But as you guys know, the schedule is so busy when you cover a team daily. And covering the Detroit Lions has been really fun these last 2 years. And happy to report that the Detroit Sports Podcast Network, myself, got an extension on our agreement. So I'll be covering the Lions for the foreseeable future for Sports Illustrated and Maven Sports, which is great because it just allows me to broadcast. It is a great way to be involved in the sports community. Building the DSP brand as well has been great. So on this week's edition, I have a great interview. Brian Rzeppa wrote an interesting book. It's called You're Hired. And what he did was he had an opportunity to sit down and interview people in the sports world, both at the college level and pros, and just kind of figure out the process of getting hired. And I think it's a fascinating look, a good read. I had an opportunity to read it last week, 150 pages or so. You can sink right in. You can follow Brian on Twitter at Brian RZEPPA and buy his book. I think it's a real interesting read on how the process works of search firms, of how people's interviews go, and things like that. The knowledge that you get is real interesting. So later on in this podcast, I'll share with you a little bit of that interview. It's really great. We conducted the interview early this week, and Brian is great, and he's dropping another book. Stay tuned towards the end of the podcast. I asked him, are there any projects in the works? And Brian is an author, and he has another project that he is working on, real interesting subject material. And I asked him about the process, too, because I'm curious, what's it like to write a book and work with editors and to have them send it back to you, and that whole process he shares. So make sure you stay tuned and listen later on in this podcast. I did want to start, though. Obviously, everybody knows that the DOC is a massive and significant supporter of the Michigan State Spartans. So all this week has been great because now you're starting to hear nationally. You're starting to hear, national pundits come out and say, well, Jim Harbaugh might not be lasting all that much longer at the University of Michigan. And I say to myself, why isn't it being talked about locally? Well, it is a little bit, but, obviously when you talk about Jim Harbaugh and Michigan, not too many people locally are going to be talking about his dismissal and things like that. Now what you're starting to hear is, an amicable divorce. You're starting to hear that maybe the contract will just run out and both sides may just decide, well, this relationship may just need to end. And maybe it does. I think that it's real interesting now how quiet it's been from the Wolverine supporters. I don't think that many supporters now of the football team that plays out of Ann Arbor, not too many people are talking national title. Not too many people are talking playoffs. And that's what a stunning upset loss to the Spartans will do. And it's just, something that is, like I said, it's such a fascinating thing to look at in that Jim Harbaugh is a quality head coach. Nobody's saying that he can't coach football. Nobody's saying that he can't coach young men. The problem is that he is going to succumb to the expectation that should be there for the University of Michigan. He was brought there not to just win 8-9 games. You can find coaches to do that. He was brought there with the intention of making Michigan nationally relevant. That's the goal. Michigan is that quality of a brand. There's no question. With the resources, with all the money that's pumped in there, to just secure 9 wins, no victories over Ohio State, 1-6 at the Big House versus Ohio State and Michigan State, no trips to Indy, those kind of things will get you dismissed. And he's had 6 years, and it's not going to turn around. So there was expectations. There was, Michigan lost a lot of talent, but after that great performance against against Minnesota, there should have been an expectation that this team should have built upon that. And something that Josh Gaddis said, the offensive coordinator, in a radio interview was real interesting because he basically highlighted the real issue. With 2 or 3 weeks to prepare, the coaching staff was able to prepare well, prepare the talent on that team against Minnesota. And it showed. The offense flowed, everything clicked, Minnesota's defense had no answers, and it was a quality performance. When things are kind of compacted in a week, when you got to actually put together a game plan a little bit faster, watch a little bit less film, have less time to prepare for your opponent, then that's where some coaching deficiencies start to show up. The game plan was wrong. Unfortunately, Joe Milton and that offense just didn't take enough chances. They were ultra conservative. The defense didn't adjust well to the offensive onslaught of the Spartans, and that's to coaching. And you start to look at it and you go, if Michigan's going to take that next leap, you got to modernize that offense a little bit and sustain it in terms of quickness, deep passing, a little bit more explosiveness on that offense, a little bit more risky opportunities, the willingness to just run the football and dink and dunk. I mean, just that last series for Michigan highlighted everything that would be wrong and considered wrong in coaching. You're down 2 scores and you're like throwing it 2-3 yards at a clip, letting the clock roll down as if you're only down a score. Michigan State was like, what are they doing? We'll just give them 2-3 yards at a clip. We'll do that, no problem, all day. This is great. So that when Michigan scored, they were just forced with no time left to just get the onside kick, which was not going to be, in terms of odds, going to be something that was going to be realistic. So Michigan's coaching staff is to blame. I think that there's enough talent on that Wolverines roster. Joe Milton, the running backs, wide receivers. You got talent, an offensive line. There's talent there. And all you have to speak to is look at Mel Tucker. Do you think Mel Tucker's crew is as talented as the Wolverines? No. But what Mel Tucker did was he empowered his coaching staff to put together an absolutely solid, rock-solid game plan that they were able to execute. And when they saw things that worked, they did not go away from it. Rocky Lombardi was throwing the ball deep. They found a defensive back in the Wolverines secondary that they felt that could be targeted. And they went to that well, time in and time again. Rocky Lombardi was sharp, and he had the opportunity to create chunk plays because of the coaching staff, because of the position that those coaches put themselves in, put those young athletes in to succeed. Can you say that in the big moments for Michigan? It just appears that the coaching staff shrinks in the biggest moments. In the big-time world of college athletics, those are the moments that you need your coaching staff to actually bring it. And for whatever reason, Jim Harbaugh just simply has not been able to get over the hump in the biggest moments. And it really puts supporters and that entire Michigan program in a tough spot because Jim Harbaugh can win you 8-9 games every year, hands down, can bring in talent. But unfortunately, that's not what now, after 6 years, what the plethora of the majority of supporters that are watching Michigan, that's not what they want. They want to see national title appearances. They want to see the program getting into the playoffs. Heck, now they're reduced to wondering, can we even defeat Michigan State consistently? It's not happening. Only 3-3 against Michigan State, 0-5, probably going to be 0-6 against Ohio State. All that leads to the recipe and the calculation and formulation that people are starting to see. The likes of Paul Feinbaum, Joel Klatt even had to come down off his Michigan high horse and come down and say, maybe that I could see Michigan parting ways with Jim Harbaugh mutually. Oh, okay, Jim, that may be what the head coach of the University of Michigan needs to do is find his way back to the National Football League. And for me personally, I just gotta, end this segment with just a big ha-ha to Joel Klatt. Everybody observed it. You can be a homer. I get it. You can be somebody that's like, we gotta uplift Michigan. We gotta promote it. But when you do stuff like that, you also have to bring the same energy and noise when you're covering the other side. Michigan State made plays. When you're so one-sided that everybody sees it, it's quite disrespectful, and it's just something that makes people turn you off. I'm sorry, Joel Klatt, but your broadcast that you put out there was not professional enough in the standard of broadcasting that you would say, okay, many people felt like you were biased toward Michigan, and many people felt like in your broadcast it was all slanted. You need to talk a little bit. Talk up Michigan State. It's no big deal. Mel Tucker's done it before. Michigan State can handle some positive pub, but when you take the pro-Michigan angle in your broadcast, it's a big turnoff. But when Michigan State ends up with when there's zeros on the clock and they win the game, it's a big ha-ha to Joel Klatt. Pump up Michigan all you want. I think you should keep doing it. Pump them up after every win. They're back every time, so that when the likes of the Spartans come in and take care of business, it really makes the victory all that much sweeter. And really, Michigan supporters, good luck. You got some tough times because this was the guy that was considered the savior. If Jim Harbaugh can't bring you to national relevance, can somebody else? Let me know. Message me at Detroit Podcast. Is there another coach that can bring the University of Michigan to national prominence? Is it someone from Ohio State? Luke Fickell, an assistant? Is it the legs of a PJ Fleck to take the next step? I think his stock is kind of going down with whatever's going on in Minnesota. Who's going to come in and handle that business if Jim Harbaugh leaves? Let me know. I want to take the time to thank everybody for supporting the Detroit Sports Podcast Network. You can find our broadcast every single day anywhere that your favorite podcast is located. Just type in these 3 words, Detroit Sports Podcast. And then once you hit subscribe, our daily content will find you. Nothing more you got to do. We cover the Detroit Tigers. Vito does an amazing job with the Tigers Talk podcast. We cover all of Detroit sports on our flagship podcast on Doc and Jock every Thursday. The Michigan Wolverines. We have a podcast specifically for you supporters called the Michigan Podcast. Steve Dace does an amazing job. We cover fantasy football. We got fans doing broadcasts. We got great interviews. Noah Taluki did a great job in terms of reaching out and saying, hey, I want to learn from you guys. He now is reaching out and doing great interviews on a podcast we call Open Mic Night. So it's great stuff. Vito does great work. Adam Strozinski, Andrew and Nick from the Fan Report. Everybody that broadcasts with us does a great job, and they do it every single week. It's awesome. Brendan Riley with the Practice Squad with Adam Strozinski. Awesome addition to the network. And so all you got to do, check out the lineup. Just subscribe to the Detroit Sports Podcast, and you can be in the know. Listen to quality audio each and every day, and we greatly appreciate it. And now my interview with Brian Rzeppa, author of You're Hired, A Guide to Working in Sports. Joining me this week is Brian Rzeppa. He's the author of You're Hired, A Guide to Working in Sports. Had an opportunity last week to read it, and it's a really good book, a detailed process about how individuals working their way through the hiring process and securing jobs in the sports field. It's a real interesting book. I highly recommend you go check it out. Follow Brian on Twitter at Brian RZEPPA. Brian, how are you doing this afternoon?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. It's great to be on the phone with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm always fascinated by those that take a chance and those that, research something that they're passionate about. Tell us a little bit about your background. I know that you're from Detroit and how you set about to write this book.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess to give some background on me personally, I have my undergrad degree is in sports management, and I worked in minor league baseball for a couple of years with the Tigers AAA affiliate, Toledo Mud Hens. So just going through that process, like the education portion, and then actually working in minor league baseball. Obviously, one of the bigger things for me was just kind of figuring out, what kind of a path forward looks like, and what a path forward could possibly look like within sports. I think as fans, a lot of the times we're always fantasizing about what moves we would make, transactions, and who would we start, things like that. So I really just want to kind of give people, that we're looking to go into sports kind of a guide as far as, what it looks like to get into those top athletic director roles or coaching roles or GM roles. And then even beyond people that are interested in working in sports themselves, I think, like I mentioned with the rise of fantasy football or, video games and things like that, people want to take control of the different teams. So it's just giving people kind of more of a behind the scenes look at, how the hiring process works. And then beyond that, the actual day to day of these jobs that go beyond just, making trades or draft picks or things like that. So even though I do touch on those kind of things, it kind of just gives people kind of an all encompassing approach to really the world of sports on the front office side.
Absolutely, and it really plays into a couple of things that could happen here locally. Obviously, one, the Detroit Tigers recently now announced that A.J. Hinch is going to be the next manager replacing Ron Gardenhire. Take us through a little bit what might have happened in that process, because it was revealed a little bit, when they had the introductory press conference that, immediately, because A.J. Hinch was suspended by Major League Baseball, that he had to wait basically until after the World Series. Well, when the details started to emerge, Al Avila came out and revealed that Al Avila contacted A.J. Hinch 30 minutes after the conclusion of the World Series. But that's not the first time that through maybe potentially back channels, there's been talks. Obviously, A.J. Hinch, a former member of the Detroit Tigers, there's been some working in the background there. What may have happened? Give us a little insight in terms of how maybe A.J. Hinch got this job.
Yeah, so, a lot of times for a very good portion of jobs, the actual hiring process comes down to search firms and employing search firms to, vet different candidates and, kind of the team develops a candidate profile, and then the search firm, goes through their entire catalog more or less of coaches to, find potential fits for what the team is looking for. I think with A.J. Hinch, like you mentioned, though, is kind of a little bit more unique circumstances because, like you said, the World Series had to end before he was able to be contacted by the Tigers. So with this kind of scenario, like you said, he's going to be a hot commodity. So there's not really the time to really wait around for a search firm to kind of develop and, contact and present it and all that. All it would be included in a normal coaching search. So this may have been, like Al Avila said, just a direct, he probably has some personal connection with A.J. Hinch from whatever it may have been. Maybe it was when A.J. Hinch was playing for the Tigers, 10 or 15 years ago, whatever it was. So this could have been a far more direct actual contact than most parts. But with that being said, the Tigers for sure, before they even contacted Hinch, definitely ran through all the different scenarios, ran through his background and things like that. Just wanted to clear everything, clear the deck so that everything was set. If they were going to decide to bring him in, that there wouldn't be anything more than the fact that they're hiring a coach that was just suspended for a year.
Absolutely. Now, a part of the book I really like, too, is because Brian took a chance and he had interviews with 17 current and former professional general managers and coaches, as well as you got an opportunity to talk to Division I collegiate athletic directors and coaches. I want to talk about that because I've had experience, covering college athletics, and it's just really a little bit more of an open process. You get a lot more insights. You get a chance to develop a little bit more of a relationship with those at the collegiate level than you do at the professional level, where everyone's so guarded and they want to make sure that things are protected and things like that. There's just a lot more challenge. So I'm curious, who did you speak to, and tell us and share with our audience some stories or an interesting note in regards to the hiring process at the collegiate level.
Yeah, no. So some of the bigger names that I'd spoken to, a lot of them were actually in the SEC for whatever reason it may have been, but the athletic director at Florida, Scott Strickland, the athletic director at Mississippi State, John Cohen, the AD at Tennessee, Phil Fulmer, who used to be their football coach for quite some time. So I think that there's a perception within athletic directors. I guess you could apply that to general managers as well, that, teams are looking for, the only thing that they're looking for is business-minded people, or I guess they're sports-minded people. And while, the connection to sports is obviously clear for anyone that applies to an athletic director role, you really don't necessarily have to be like the Harvard MBA or whatever the stereotype that may exist. One of the more interesting things that I found throughout the research for the book was kind of just the variety of backgrounds that people have when they're, starting their coaching career or their athletic directing careers. And so one of the studies that I had found, they looked into the academic backgrounds of each of the athletic directors. And so obviously there were a lot of those MBAs, but then there was also people that had backgrounds in like engineering, journalism, political science, and even like social work. So not really things that you would think would apply to an athletic director. You'd think a sports-minded person. So I think that was kind of one of the more encouraging things to me was that, it's not necessarily closed off to people that have that business mindset and things like that. So, a lot of it does come down to soft skills, like communication and things of that nature. So definitely something promising for someone that wants to move into that kind of line of work that may not have, I guess, the stereotypical business background. So you're definitely not ruled out automatically based on, not having an MBA or anything like that, which I thought was a pretty cool thing to find out.
Yeah, absolutely. And, another interesting note in the book, too, and it applies to life as well. It's about relationships. It's, when you walk into an interview, there are opportunities that going in you're not going to get. But the experience that you get to look somebody in the eye, to tell them your vision, to share with them your passion, sometimes, maybe even 10 years down the road, when the opportunity may present itself again, someone remembers, you know what, that individual just struck me. He said that, he's hardworking, and then he took another job and built his way up. So just like in life, it's also not about what you know, but sometimes it's about who you know, and really selling yourself to these individuals. Because a lot of times these decision makers, they go by feel. They don't just look at, what a search firm tells them. They look at and they, really harken back to the time that was spent, the meetings that they've had with potential candidates. The value of relationships cannot be understated.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's probably one of the bigger takeaways for someone with the book, is that your networking ability is absolutely crucial. I guess to kind of expand on your point as well, even if you don't get the job throughout this interview process, the interview process at these high-level roles is generally so intensive and unlike most people have ever experienced. So just having the opportunity to actually go through that, so that, when you do come up for different opportunities, you'll have that experience of having to build your portfolio, having to research your interviewer and who you're going to be interviewing with. Like I said, these are skills that apply to any kind of line of work, but especially within the sports field. You really do, especially when you're looking at athletic directors and general managers, you're responsible for so much more than what's actually going on the field. At the athletic director level, you have to be responsible for compliance and working with boosters and things of that nature. And then on the general manager side, you're again working, with your sales staff, you're working with the operations team. There's a million different things that don't actually relate to sports that you're responsible for. Being able to go through that process and know that you'll have answers to some of the questions that you'll for sure will come up. It's an invaluable process, to say the least.
So now, turning our attention to the world of professional sports here locally, the general manager and the head coach of the Detroit Lions, they're firmly on the hot seat. And there's a strong chance, if the losing ways continue with the Detroit Lions, Sheila Ford Hemp could make the decision to part ways with these individuals. And like you've said, and it's highlighted in your book, the previous situation in terms of how these guys were hired and how Bob Quinn got his opportunity was, the Ford family went to the league, and the league recommended Ernie Accorsi, who then went out and did his due diligence and recommended the Ford family to hire GM Bob Quinn. At this point in time, I'm curious, do you think right now that on the desk inside Allen Park is a short list of potential replacements for both general manager Bob Quinn and Matt Patricia, should they go down that road? Because a lot of times people think that these decisions are made at the spur of the moment after a tough loss. But when you get a sense of the inner workings, and based on reading your book, there's a lot more preparation. There's a lot more details that go on behind the scenes than just standing up at a podium and announcing the firing of highly paid associates and colleagues.
Yeah, no, I think that's an aspect that gets overlooked as well, is that, it does seem like a lot of these things are spur of the moment. endeavors. But ultimately, when you think about it, these are, $100 million organizations, if not billion-dollar organizations. So I don't think most decisions are being made on a spur-of-the-moment process. So I think, like any other business of its size, you're constantly evaluating your personnel and evaluating what's out there and kind of, looking to see what's out in the market. So I think that is at least some kind of positive that can be taken from Lions fans, is that, I'm sure that the process you're not going to be starting from absolute zero. They're going to have an idea of what they want to look for, and, a GM and a head coach, assuming that both Quinn and Patricia go down. So, I'm pretty optimistic, whether that's a fault of mine or not, pretty optimistic that they'll already have gotten the ball rolling and, like I said, won't be going into this completely with a blank slate.
Which interview subject was among your favorite in your book?
So I think that definitely one of the most that kind of stood out to me and the most that I really gleaned stuff from was Jeff Barber, who's now the athletic director at Charleston Southern. He had previously worked as the athletic director at Liberty, and then prior to that had also worked in minor league baseball and was kind of on the tracks to becoming a Major League Baseball general manager. So just to kind of hear like his wealth of experience of, both working in baseball, in professional baseball, and then, working for years as an athletic director was just crucial for me to kind of get an entire picture of the book. And, just talking to him was just an incredible experience. And he gave me so many different insights that I really hadn't even considered. And given the fact that he was one of the first people that I had spoken to, he really helped shape the interviews for the rest of the book. So, I really couldn't be more appreciative of that.
The book is You're Hired, A Guide to Working in Sports. Had the privilege of talking to the author, Brian Rzeppa. You can go to DetroitSportsPodcast.com and click through the Amazon banner. And when you make that purchase, they kick us back a little something. Check out the book. It's 150 pages or so, and it's a good read. You can read it over the span of a couple days. Really insightful. Brian took the time to really delve into a really fascinating subject, and I appreciate you sharing it with us. And I really hope that those listening really take the opportunity to buy the book and really dive in and learn the stories about an interesting subject matter, the hiring and the hiring process of those working in a billion-dollar industry, the sports industry. It's a behind-the-scenes look. Brian did his due diligence. Do you have any projects in the works, anything else that has come across your desk or interest that you maybe are looking at in the future?
Yeah, so my second book will actually probably be coming out at some point next year. It's called The Outliers, Being a Cultural Anomaly in Sports. So I spoke to around 40 different athletes for that one. And it's basically kind of giving experience with people that are underrepresented in sports. So like African-American hockey players, Asian-American football players, things like that. So kind of detailing the struggles that they kind of went through and the different challenges, how they overcame it, and figuring out, why those groups are underrepresented and figuring out how we can kind of fix that moving forward and be a little bit more inclusive in sports.
Make sure you follow Brian on Twitter at Brian RZEPPA. That's at Brian RZEPPA. Check out the book. It's a great read. Thanks for the time, Brian. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on.